right. Well, today's presentation is called Marketing Your Student Leadership Experience, and what I'm going to talk about is how to focus on, one, getting experience as a student. So how do you get some leadership experience, and thinking about your application materials and the process for that. And then the second part of it is really how do you market that for even after you graduate. So whether that's for job searching, for graduate school, how do you talk about that leadership experience to help you to get those opportunities and get that job and get that grad school. So what I wanted to start with was some data that just shows how important leadership is to employers. And so this is taken from NACE, and these are attributes that employers seek on a candidate's resume. So you can see a whole bunch of things that are up here, and leadership is certainly up there high on the list. In fact, it's over some of the things that you might think about, like technical skills or computer skills, creativity. So it's right under communication skills, and before initiatives, almost 70% is what they're asking for, or what they like to see in terms of leadership. So we know that that's one scale that shows it's important. This is another one, again from NACE, which is a National Association of Colleges and Employers. And it's looking at the influence of attributes in terms of hiring. So when employers are thinking about candidates and thinking about who they want to hire, what is important to them? So they've rated the highest here is what their major is. And this is going to vary by industry, how true that is. But they might be looking at major. But the second thing on the list is has held a leadership position. So that, when you compare that to GPA, a high GPA, that is over that, as well as even being involved in extracurricular activities. So that leadership and getting involved on campus are really important to employers, and things that we don't always think about. We might think about major, we might think about GPA, what school you've attended, and then volunteer work, foreign language, and study abroad are on here as well. But we again see that leadership is really important to employers who are looking at those resumes, who are doing those interviews. And so we want to talk about all those ways that leadership interacts with those other skills, and how you also might recognize some of those other skills that were on the list, so like communication skills, interpersonal skills, organizational skills, are also things that you gain from leadership experiences. So from being a leader on campus or being in an organization on campus, you are, whether or not you realize it or not, are picking up skills, we hope, in things like learning and reasoning, self-awareness and development, so you're learning more about yourself through that process. Group dynamics, there's certainly a lot of that goes on with organizations that you might belong to, whether they're positive or negative group dynamics. You learn about working in groups, and that can translate to the workplace. Civic responsibility, interpersonal interactions, communication, strategic planning, and then personal behavior. So I like this image because it shows, again, how you can take those experiences and that involvement and think about what are those traits that I'm learning from that I can apply to the workplace, or that I can talk about on my resume, that I can talk about in an interview when they're asking what kind of strengths that I bring, or what did I learn from that experience. It gives me some ideas to think about that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we go in detail about resumes and interviewing as well. So the first thing to really start thinking about before you're applying for anything are a few things like, what am I learning or experiencing as a student leader? So besides what am I involved in, that can be a little bit easier to make that list of things that you're involved in, student organizations, leadership positions that you've held. That's important. But you want to start thinking about that next step. So what am I learning from that? What experiences or skills am I gaining from that? Because that is really the core of why those employers like those leadership skills. It's not just I've held one, it's because by holding one, they're assuming that you're gaining some of those skills and experiences. And so that's what you really want to start to brainstorm. And start to think about, what do I need if it's obtaining a leadership position, if that's my goal, is to gain a leadership position on campus, what are those skills or experiences that I might need? If it's to be accepted into a graduate school program, what do I need for that? And then if it's getting a job in my profession, what are those things that I need for that? And that's going to vary a little bit by program, by industry, but you want to think about what your end goal is and what you want from that, and then ultimately where do they connect. So what are you learning and experiencing? What do they want from you? And how do we make those meet in the middle, or show an employer or show a student organization that I'm interviewing for that I have exactly what you're looking for. Here it is. I'm making it easy for you to see that. So that's really the goal of this presentation, is to really think about how you can market those things and come to that where they connect and make it easy for them to choose you. So the first part we're going to talk about is writing a resume. And I'll go over some basics, but I'm going to focus a lot on how you highlight your leadership experience in a resume and some of those best practices. But the first thing I'll point out, I know you can't read all of this, but I like the general image of it. And it says how to match your resume to the job you want. Because really the key part of the resume writing part of it is tailoring your resume. So you don't want to have a resume that's really generic that you send out to everything. All the positions that you're applying for would have the same thing. Everything on campus, every scholarship, it's the same thing. If you haven't tailored it, it's probably not doing a great job of marketing your skills and experiences. So you want to think about what they're looking for. So in this one, there's a job ad. So it could be, what is that position that you're applying for, that internship, that full-time job, that position on campus. And then you want to think about your resume and how do those things match. So those things that are highlighted, the blue has these role matches. The green are the value matches. So what are they looking for that matches up what my values and experiences and previous experiences and skills are. And then skills match as well too. What skills are they looking for, and have I listed them on my resume? And that is a really easy way, is to really get out that highlighter and look at those position descriptions and highlight it, because that's the roadmap that they're giving you. They're saying this is what we want. So your job is to make it really easy for them to see that you have those skills and to put that in there. So I like this visual to show that process that you can take to start tailoring those things. But we'll start from kind of the top and go down. This seems really obvious. You want to put your contact information on your resume. But what I like to point out are things like, have I checked my voicemail greeting lately? That's something we don't think about a lot. You might have set it up a long time ago and forgot that maybe you have a quote from Family Guy on there or something like that. You really want to listen to that and make sure if an employer calls you or somebody offering a position calls you, that you would not be embarrassed by that voicemail. Also, check your voicemail and delete old messages, because there's nothing else that people hate worse is calling, and maybe they're calling to offer you an interview and they can't leave you a voicemail because your voicemail box is full. So check it, delete it, keep checking it as people call you. That is really important. If you're in search mode, don't just call people back because you have a number but there's no message and say, did somebody call me? Because that's not going to sound very professional when you're calling an employer. So it's things that we don't always think about that are going to become important. And then on the same line as being professional is thinking about what your email address is. It doesn't have to be anything specific, but you want it to be professional sounding. It can be your UCO, school email, a general Gmail with your name, something like that. But you want to stay away from things like Hot Chick 2017 or Dragon Slayer at yahoo.com. I've seen everything. And so you don't want to be that person, and you want them to take you seriously. So you want to pay attention to what email you're using. It's pretty easy to create a new one if you need one that's a little bit more professional. The next section are objectives, and this is where people, I think, start to really get confused. And they're not sure, do I need an objective? If I put one, what do I include? Objectives are optional. So you don't always have to have one. And honestly, sometimes you need the space more than you need that objective, and it's okay to leave it off. But what it is it's your objective right now for this specific resume that you're using. It's not your whole career objective, is to become a lawyer. You really want to focus on what are you looking for right now. So it might be to obtain a resident assistant position. It's very specific and to the point. Or seeking a sales internship for summer 2017. It tells me the type of position that you're applying for and when. So if you're going to include one, you want it to be specific. But again, it's okay if you don't include one too. And then education, you just want to make sure that you're listing your education with your most recent going backwards. So if you received a previous degree or have transferred, you can include those on there, but you would want to include your current degree first. So that would be where you're going to school, your major, minor, degree information, graduation date. You don't even have to list like anticipated graduation date. We assume in the future that's when you plan to graduate. And GPA, a lot of people have questions about that. If you have a high GPA, definitely put it on there. What is low varies by employer and by industry and by organization. Those types of things, if there is a minimum requirement, they're going to find out anyway, or they'll ask for transcripts. Don't lie about it. And so you can go ahead and put that on there if that's a requirement for what you're applying for. Some people will use a 3.0 cutoff rule, but if you have a 2.98, it's kind of hard to say, oh, leave it off, because if you don't put it on there, they're probably going to assume that it's pretty low. So you kind of have to think about those things. And we in Career Services can help you figure that part out too. And do you include things or do you not? All right. So let's get into kind of the real meat of it, and that's talking about experience. And there are different ways that you can set up your experience and different things that you can include. And so a lot of times you'll see ones that focus on just specifically on jobs or work history. But within experience, that can be a lot of different things. So it can be jobs, it can be internships, it can be unpaid experiences, leadership experience, volunteer experience. You can really choose what to include and how you want to describe that. So examples of some headings would be leadership experience. If you really have a lot of it and want to focus on it, you could have a section that's just called that. And then your other section might be additional experience, or you could label it something else that fits the experience. Relevant experience is something else that people will sometimes pull out. Maybe you've had some great experience relevant to what you're applying for, but right now you're working at a restaurant as a hostess. That's not as relevant as that internship you had last summer. So sometimes by creating a separate section like relevant experience, you can pull the things to the top that are most relevant, and then you can have your additional experience that still lists that you have that job now, but it's not as important and not what you want someone to see first. Because in general, in each section, you want that to be in reverse chronological order, so you want to list most recent going backwards, but again, sometimes that sticks you with a certain format that doesn't best highlight your experience. So you can, and you do have some flexibility, you can move things around a little bit. You want to focus on your successes and achievements, so don't just copy a job description on your resume, because you hopefully did more than what that was. Those are pretty basic tasks. They don't focus on the things that you've achieved and that you've accomplished and that you were successful at doing. You want to make sure to use action verbs, and I'll give examples of all of these things to start. And we do suggest using bullet points instead of a paragraph because nobody wants to read a paragraph, right? We wanted to make it easy and quick to read. So bullet points starting with action verbs make it easier. And then you want to list things in order of significance. So just as we talked about how to order kind of your experience on the page, you want to think about in your bullet points what's most important. And I would put that most important thing in that first bullet point because those people are reading it or scanning it from top to bottom, and you want them to be able to see those things first. And it never hurts to quantify where it's relevant. So that could be the amount of people that you worked with. It could be the amount of children that you taught in a classroom. It could be the amount of money that you were responsible for as treasurer for an organization. Wide range of things that could be, but we do know that people like to see that, and it shows kind of the amount that you were responsible for and that amount of responsibility. And some of the other basic things that you want to include besides those descriptions would be things like job title, excuse me, job title, employer, city, state, the dates that you were employed, and that just has to be a month and a year. You don't have to include a specific start and end date. And then again, those bullet points focusing on accomplishments. So let's look at some examples. So here's a basic example. It's okay. Waitress position. They have the requisite things, right? The dates that they worked, where it was, those basic things. Waited tables, ran a cash register, performed excellent customer service. But we can take that same job and really expand a little bit more on those. And this is for a job, a lot of students feel like, I haven't had a lot of experience, and so I don't really have much to say. But providing outstanding customer service in a fast-paced environment sounds a little bit better than just providing excellent customer services. It tells me what kind of environment you're working in. I know a little bit more about that and what skills you gained and what you had to do that. Demonstrated solid interpersonal skills working with a diverse population and managed a cash bank in excess of $500 daily. So again, there's that quantifying piece as well. If you compare these two, most of us would agree that that second one sounds better, and this sounds like they have more responsibility or did more in that job. So it's tweaking it a little bit to make that stand out. And here's another, or I'll have another example I think in a second. You can do the same with your leadership experience and almost set it up like a job if you really want to highlight that. So including things like the positions that you held, the scope and the role of that position, what did you do in there, team involvement versus leadership responsibilities. So there were things that you did as a group, but anything that you did on your own, you really want to highlight those things. Tasks and duties and achievements. And then think about things like awards or certificates that you might have gained. Were there any professional development opportunities, meetings and work, different types of training that you had to go through for that experience? So those are kind of things that you want to start thinking about. And here's, again, another example of something as a student you might include. This is with new Bronco orientation team lead. Talked to new students about the university, attended all enrollment central training, and helped with marketing. True, basic, all part of that position. But if we take that and expand a little bit, it's completing a semester-long facilitator training class. So that tells me how much training that you had just to take on that position. That says something to me about you and your commitment. Led a small group of students during summer enrollment sessions versus just attending. There's a difference there. Planned and implemented activities and facilitated discussion for a 3-day leadership retreat, and then promoted program at orientation and helped develop theme for the following year. Sounds a lot more than just help better, and that you did a lot more than just help with marketing. So a lot of the times we feel like by doing that, or when you're told expand on it, really sell yourself, it feels like you're stretching it. And we're not asking you to say anything that you didn't do, but oftentimes people don't give themselves enough credit. So giving yourself credit, really thinking about talking that up, because if you're not doing it, who's doing it for you? So it's okay to expand on those things and give some of the more detail, because that's going to make you more competitive. And in these positions that you're applying for, they are going to be competitive. So you want to make sure that you are doing what you can with that. Here's some other examples of leadership experience. So this is Business Honors Club, a vice president of external relations. Big Brothers, Big Sisters, volunteer experience is something else that you can include as well. Sometimes people don't think about that. Leadership experience is especially helpful if you don't have a lot of work experience. And sometimes if you're really involved on campus, it's hard to get that. And so that can be another way to not necessarily make up for that, but to show this is what I've been doing with my time. And these are the skills that I've gained. And so that's where it can be helpful to expand on even things like volunteer experience. Now, if you have a lot more work experience or internship experience, you can still include things like volunteer experience, but you may not want to give bullet points describing what you did. So all of that is more on a case-by-case basis, and really thinking about tailoring it. What are those most important pieces? What do I want to highlight? And then which parts maybe I want to put on there, but maybe not expand on as much. And then there are other things that you can include in other headings that you can think about. So activities and involvement, you might want a skills section. If you're in a technical field, you might want a specific one that says computer skills or technical skills or software skills. A summary of qualifications can sometimes be helpful at the top to summarize those most relevant experiences or skills. Relevant or related coursework. Again, not always something that makes sense, but sometimes you want to highlight some of the courses that you've taken, maybe ones that are different than your major. It might be obvious, not always, but sometimes which courses you took from your major, but maybe you took some, it wasn't quite a minor, but you want to highlight some of those other courses that you took. Languages, especially if you have more than one additional language to English, you might want that as a section, or if that's something that you think people in your field are going to value. So you could think about that. So the nice thing is there's not just one way to write a resume, and you don't feel like you have to fit it in this one set template because it's not going to fit for everybody, and everyone is going to have a different set of experiences and be applying for different things. So we'd like to give you different ideas and suggestions that fit what you already have and help you best to tailor that and market that to whoever it is that's reading it. You could also do some of those if you didn't want a separate section. You can do something like additional skills, and that allows you to put a couple of them together and not take up a whole lot of space. So that's what that is an example of as well. So this is something that comes up often too with students figuring out what they should include or not include on the resume when it comes to things like what I've called intercultural experiences. So those might be memberships and organizations that are related to their, or may or may not be theirs, but religious, political, ethnic groups. And so maybe they're afraid if I put this on there, is somebody going to discriminate against me because I'm doing that? So good question, valid question. Do I put it on there? Do I not? If I have a leadership experience, do I put that on there because I have the leadership experience, even if it shows what my affiliation is? And so I do like to talk about that a little bit too. So there's pros and cons. So there's not a right or wrong answer for it, but I like to go over pros and cons, and then everyone has to make their own decision. So some of the cons would be that somebody could read it and you could fall victim of discrimination because they assume that you fit with that group. There are certainly protected classes that it is illegal to discriminate against, but we know that it happens, and you're putting that information out there. So it is something to be thoughtful of. And in spite of progress that a lot of companies and employers have made, maybe they do have non-discrimination policies, but are those really lived out in practice? We don't always know, and it can be hard to guess. So that's the scary part of it, I think, for most people, is figuring out about putting it on there because of those things. And it's something to really think about. But some of the pros are that a lot of employers do want to hire diverse candidates. And they can't come out and just ask you some of those questions about your diverse background, but it shows that you're involved in those different things and kind of maybe are identifying yourself as that. If they are screening you because of those qualifications, is that somebody you really want to work for or something you want to belong to anyway? I think that's a big question for a lot of people is, okay, if they're going to do that, how would it feel if I maybe got through and got the job, but I'm in the workplace? What kind of environment is that? And that's something else that is really important to think about. And again, including information on a resume can be a way for you to screen out employers that wouldn't be supportive of that by putting that on there too. If it's something that's important to you, then you can put it on there. So if you don't get chosen, you don't always know why that is, but it's important to you, so you chose to put it on there. So those are some of the pros and cons, but I want to talk also about options that you have with that information. One is to just leave it out. If you don't want to include it, you don't have to put it on there, but you also can leave out pieces of it. So for example, organization names that you belong to. And maybe you also only want to list experiences that are most relevant and that are focused on your specific target at that point in time. So what are you applying to? What experiences are most relevant? You don't have to include everything, even though employers like to see that involvement. You don't have to include it. Other people will generalize it, so just say like political organization instead of saying a specific party that you were working with, or church, or anti-discrimination organization. So there are ways to show I was involved in this, but you're not giving away what your potential affiliation is. And then again, you can just include it and include the names of it and those organizations. But again, you still want to always focus on those skills and experiences that are most relevant to the job. If it's not relevant at all, don't put it on there. But a lot of the times we have had some leadership experience related to groups or organizations, and so we don't want to say just leave it out because you may be discriminated against. There can be some benefits to including it, but you really want to focus more on the skills that you gained from that and experience, less on what type of organization it was. If that makes sense. Okay, and again, if you're going to do it, just touch on most of this, do so subtly, tailor the position, and then you must be comfortable about talking about it in an interview, because that could come up as well. If it's something you're not comfortable with, you probably don't want to put it on those materials too, because you never know when someone could ask about it. Similar things come up about, should I list my fraternity or sorority membership on my resume as well? So some advice for that would be, yes, if you're a recent graduate especially, that's not a bad thing to include it on there. So why is that? One, it shows you've been active on campus, and we know that employers like to see that students have been active in those extracurricular activities. A lot of those positions and involve leadership as well. Shows that you are a well-rounded student, so that's a positive as well. And again, how do you list it? You want to focus on things like your leadership experience and also things like community service, because a lot of those organizations are going to have some type of philanthropic part to them as well. So those can be ways to focus on that. You're not going to focus on all the date parties that you had. You're going to focus on what are those skills and experiences that you had that way. So it is okay to list it. We do get that question. You just want to think about, how do I talk about the most relevant pieces of it? Okay, so we're going to switch gears and talk about interviews, but questions about resumes before I start talking about interviewing and totally change? No? Okay. So also want to talk a little bit about interviewing, because most of us can't get out of it, even though a lot of us don't like to do it. We're going to have to do it at some point in time, but it is something that you can get better at doing. You can get practice and you can prepare for, and I think that that can be really helpful. This is just a little comic that I think is funny that talks about, oh, you have a master's degree and a PhD, and then they say, yes, it's all very impressive, but interestingly, I have no common sense whatsoever. Clearly, it's something you wouldn't want to say in an interview, but it shows that we don't always think about those things. But it is important to think about what is okay and what's not okay to talk about in an interview. So the good news is you can become more comfortable interviewing. You can gain skills doing it. You won't die from doing it. You'll survive and get better and better the more that you do it. But it is important to prepare and not just go in thinking, I'm just going to wing it and see how I do. Most of the time, that's probably not going to be your best bet, and you won't be on your best. So you want to prepare ahead of time and think about some things. One of those things being, think about yourself. A lot of times we don't sit around going, what am I really good at? What do I like to do? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Maybe you do, but most of us don't reflect that much. But that's exactly what the interviewer is going to be asking you about. It's all going to be about you. So you probably want to spend some time thinking about you before you go forward and do that interview. So what are those strengths and weaknesses? What are some of your goals? Think about your experiences. So what are those leadership experiences that you've had? Jobs, internships, what have you been involved in? Where did you volunteer? This is where your resume is really helpful. Most cases you've already submitted that anyway before you're being interviewed for anything, but reviewing that and being familiar with that, because anything on there, one, is fair game, but it can give you some ideas of where to start, because your resume hopefully has detail on it, but the interview, you're going to be talking even more about it and giving even more details about it. Okay. The other thing besides learning about yourself that you want to learn about is whatever it is that you're applying for. So if it's that job, you want to learn about that organization or that company. If it's a grad school, you want to learn about that program, that university, those faculty. If it's for a leadership position, you want to know what that organization does. What are they looking for? What is the culture of that group? So that you know more about it when you go in to do that interview. You can ask people like your professors, ask advisors, ask students that have been through that process or that are involved already. Look at those job postings. That's, again, going to give you a roadmap. things that you might want to know about, especially if it's for a job, the size of the company, how many employers, do they have any new initiatives? The more that you can find out, the better. These days, it becomes easier and easier to go online and find a lot of this information, but you want to do your research ahead of time and not go in not knowing much about what it is you're even interviewing for. All right, and then what to wear. That's important as well, too, because first impressions count. And so when you're going to an interview, you want to make sure that you're making the best first impression and dressing professionally. Excuse me. In most cases, that's going to be business professional. In some cases, especially if it's for maybe those positions on campus, those student positions, leadership positions, it might be more business casual. And we'll go over examples of both of those. But you can't really be overdressed for an interview. I'd rather err on the side of caution for that. So most of the time, professional dress is going to mean a suit. So for men, that's a suit and a tie. So that's the whole thing: jacket, pants, a shirt, button-down shirt, tie, nice shine shoes. A belt is supposed to match your shoes. Not a lot of cologne. You could maybe have a small portfolio with you that has resumes or information in it. Clean shaven. Could also just be trimmed facial hair if you have that. And then you've ironed your clothes. You didn't just grab them from the bottom of the hamper. That's important. For women, what's again appropriate would be a suit. That could be a pants or a skirt. If you are wearing a skirt, you want to make sure that it is knee length. You want to make sure if there's any kind of like slit in it that you have practiced sitting in it and are very comfortable with that, because you don't always know, and you don't want to get into an interview and be uncomfortable or realize something is inappropriate that you're wearing. You want to wear either a button-up blouse, camisole, something under your jacket. Make sure again that that's not too low cut. Shine, closed-toe. Heels have been more traditional look, but it is acceptable to wear flats as well. So there's a little more flexibility than there used to be with that. Same thing, pantyhose is still going to be the most traditional, so it's knowing who you're interviewing with and how traditional that field is. If you're going into an accounting interview, they're probably going to be pretty traditional about what their looks are versus a more creative type of organization. Again, you could do a portfolio, light makeup, nothing too crazy. Make sure your clothes are ironed. One set of earrings. You might have your ears pierced under your nose and everything, but probably don't want them all the way up your ear for your interview. Here are some pictures of professional dress. You can see some suits and skirts, pants, and some males in different colors, and some accessories as well too. Shoes, belts, watches, minimal jewelry, minimal purses, not having huge bags for that. Business casual is something else that you will run into, and so it might be, again, for the student organization type interviews, leadership interviews. It could also potentially be that you're asked to come to an information session for an employer or for a group. And so you want to make a good first impression, but it's not necessarily a full professional dress type of thing. So in business casual, it's going to be a step up from probably what you wear to class for most of us, but that's going to be like nice slacks, could be a skirt, it could be button-down shirt still and a tie, but you don't have to wear a jacket and have that full suit. If it's on the more casual side, that polo shirt, khakis can be considered business casual as well. Cardigans can be appropriate. So again, we're just avoiding things like shorts and slacks and leggings, and all of those things are not going to be appropriate business casual. So it's still, again, a step up, but it's not necessarily that full suit. Okay. Other things that you want to think about, your nonverbals and your verbals. Be on time, which really means be early. Typically, 10 to 15 minutes early is what's going to be standard for that. You don't want to get there too early and make it awkward because you're sitting there for an hour before they even get to work or something like that. But you certainly don't want to be late. And there have been times that because someone is late, they do not get the interview and they do not get the job. It does happen. So it's important to know where you're going, what room you're going to, what building you're going to, what the directions are, so that you are prepared for that. Make sure that you have a firm handshake, you're making eye contact. that you are listening. It sounds really obvious, but it's amazing how much once we start talking, we stop listening. Good body posture and body language. And don't forget to smile. And that sounds really obvious, but we get really nervous, and sometimes the first thing that happens is our smile just disappears from our face. And you have to remind yourself, like, oh yeah, I do want to be here. Even if I hate interviewing, I want to be here because I want to get whatever it is that I'm interviewing for. So you have to sometimes remind yourself to go ahead and to smile, to talk to yourself about, hey, no, I want to be here. This is a good thing. So that comes across and that energy comes across. And paying attention to that voice, your confidence. That's one of the biggest tips that I give to students, is just be confident, even if you have to fake it. Because oftentimes it can be one of those things that you can fake it till you make it. You start to believe in it, and they don't know if you're faking it or not. You appear confident. They're going to assume that you're confident. So that's a really important thing. You don't want to be overly confident, but you want to be confident. And then pay attention to any other kind of nervous habits that you might have, or if you use a lot of filler words, ums, uhs, likes, you knows, they can sneak in there, and so you want to be aware of those. Oftentimes, the more prepared you are, I find, the less you have of those because you've already thought about what you want to say for the most part. So we're going to go through next just some examples of interview questions. There are three main kind of categories: direct questions, open-ended questions, and behavioral questions. Direct ones are pretty much ones like, tell me about yourself. And there's a video on here. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it, but I'll try to play it. As I blind myself. There we go. From The Office.
Describe myself. 3 words. Hardworking, alpha male, jackhammer, merciless, insatiable.
So yes, he used more than the 3 words, but maybe not the types of words that you would want to use if you were able to hear any of that. So I like to use that example to think about maybe what not to do, but the odds are you're going to be asked, tell me about yourself, as the first question in almost any interview you're going to want to do, or that you don't want to do, go into. So it's hard to get around that question, but that's one of the hardest ones. It seems really simple, but oftentimes people struggle the most with it because it's so open, right? What do I include? What do they really want to know in that question? So the answer to that, without just skipping across that one, really I like to talk about the tell me about yourself question as a snapshot. So thinking about kind of an outline, maybe your past. Don't go into the whole history of your birth and all that kind of stuff, but where are you from? Where'd you go to school? What's that background? Your present, what are you doing right now? What year are you in school? What are you involved in? And then your future can be, what do you hope to do? You know, I'm hoping to get this internship or this leadership position or get a job with this company because, and you can tie it to why you're there today. So if you have that, it makes it feel a little less all over the place because you start going, what do they want to know? Do they want to know about what I'm involved in? Do they want to know about my family? Do they want to know where I'm from? You want to stick to things that are more professional things, academic things. They don't really need to know about all your dogs or your cats or anything like that, even if they're really important to you. You want to stick to things that are going to be more relevant to that position. And they can ask more if they want to know more later. But again, think of it kind of as that snapshot introduction is the advice that I give for that one. Other things you could get, you know, if the job involves travel, do you want to travel? When are you available to start working? What's your GPA? Are you an extrovert or an introvert? There's not a whole lot of extra stuff to say about these things. What is your GPA is going to be pretty straightforward. Are you an extrovert or an introvert? You might be able to answer that, but also expand on a little bit too. So it's going to depend on what that question is. Open-ended questions are ones where they're going to want you to expand a little bit more. So that's, tell me about yourself is going to have more of that. Why are you interested in that position? That's something else that's really commonly asked, and it sounds really obvious. But if you've never sat and thought exactly about how you would describe why you're interested in that, it can come across in the interview like you're not really sure. Because you could sit there and go, well, I think that this fits with my goals. And that's going to sound like you're not really interested in this position and you have not put thought into it. And so that is something you want to think about before every interview, is answering that question of, why do I even want this? And being able to give specific information about that is important. It could be those strengths and weakness questions that people dread. Those are examples of open-ended. 2 or 3 accomplishments. What ideas do you have for the program or position? Be prepared for that, especially if you're applying for leadership positions on campus. They might ask for your ideas. So you want to be able to think about what you already know about that organization or that group and ideas that you might have. What have you learned from your extracurricular experience? What have you learned from your leadership? And that's why it's important to do all that pre-homework that we talked about at the beginning, so that you can answer and you're ready to answer those questions. I will say for weaknesses, I'll give quick tips on that because people always hate answering that question. That doesn't mean they want your biggest life weakness ever. One, so think about that. You don't have to share that. It's really learning more about that you know about yourself and you don't think you're perfect. So I like to frame it more as what's an area of growth for you, or what's something that's maybe a little more challenging that you're working on, and then how have you been working on it. Don't try to turn a strength into a weakness, like, well, my weakness is I'm a perfectionist. Because they're going to roll their eyes, maybe not really roll them in their head, they're rolling them, because they've heard that 100 times and they don't believe it. And it doesn't really sound like a weakness. Now, you might be sitting there going, but that really is my weakness. And then I talk to people about just describing what that means then. What does that mean to be a perfectionist to you, and why is that a weakness? But if you say, well, I really get bogged down in details and sometimes miss the bigger picture, and that's caused issues when I've worked on projects or worked in groups with people that are focused on the bigger picture. So I've learned that about myself, and I make sure that I'm looking and taking a step back. And so you can answer it, you've realized it's an issue, but it's not a deal breaker, right? It's not saying something like, I'm really pretty lazy and I don't like to get up in the morning, so I might be late. That's probably not what you would want to tell somebody. I like to sleep in too, but I wouldn't tell somebody that in an interview. And so you want to be paying attention to that. And again, pick something that's also relevant. If you were like, my weakness is I can't cook and it has nothing to do with cooking at all, they're not really going to care about that. So again, it's about that self-knowledge piece of it. And behavioral questions are going to be some of the most commonly asked questions. And those are the ones that are going to ask for more examples. So give me an example or tell me about a time. So tell me about a time that you went above and beyond the call of duty, right? Not just what your job was, but went above and beyond. Give an example of a time that you used good logic and problem solving. So you have to think back to everything that you've ever done and come up with an example. And that can be a little bit stressful. But again, that's where that pre-preparation, that homework, that resume writing all helps, because hopefully you've reviewed that and you've thought about some scenarios that could fit with some of these. And it's okay to ask for a second to say, that's a good question. Can I have a minute to think about that? So that you can think about everything that you've done. But the best thing you can do is come up with a specific example and not just say, well, I've had to do that a lot in my position as vice president for my club. You want to think about a specific thing and talk about that. One way to help you do that is to use what we call the STAR method. So STAR stands for the situation or the task, action that you took, and the results that you achieved. And this just helps to make sure you're outlining it and you're telling a story. And that's what interviewing is all about anyway. But when you're answering that and giving an example, you want to make sure that you are telling all parts of it. So if it was thinking about a time that you went above and beyond, what was that situation or that task? So was it I was working in a group project and one of my members fell ill, and I knew that she had a part and she would normally do that, but I wanted to be able to help her out. So what is the action that you took? And if you are working in groups, you want to focus on what you did, not just what the whole group did, because they're not looking to choose the whole group. They're looking at you. They're interviewing you. So what was that action that you specifically took? And then wrapping it up with what are the results that you achieved and what did you learn about it? That's the part that people forget the most. They'll say, oh, this is what happened and this is what I did. and then they'll kind of stop and forget about the whole, and how did it turn out? How did it work out? People want to know that. Even if it didn't work out well, that's when you could talk about, and this is what I learned, it didn't work out, and this is what I learned from that, or this is what I would do differently next time. And so you want to be able to take that kind of full circle and have closure. I'm not promising that you're going to sit there in every interview and go in your head, hopefully, STAR, am I doing all parts of it? But hopefully the outline just helps make sure that, again, you're organized and thinking about, do I have that beginning, that middle, and that end when answering those questions? And then at the end of the interview, they're going to say, do you have any questions for me? And yes should be your answer. I do have questions. And not just because you're supposed to, but because you are also making sure that this is a good fit for you. So it does allow you to get some more information about them and find out, is this a place that I want to work? Is this a group that makes sense for me? Do I really want this position? Use that time to ask those types of questions. It is a way to show off that you've done that research. On your website, you discuss the importance of hiring leaders. How do you assess someone's leadership potential? That's something that shows, oh, you were looking at our website and you do know what is important to our organization. Could you describe a typical day? What's in the future of this industry? Some basic things. What is the hiring timeline? When can I expect to hear back from you? People often forget to ask that, and then you're just sitting around waiting, never know if you're ever going to hear from them again. It's okay to ask that. But you want to avoid blatant self-interest, like, so let's get to the point and you tell me how much I would get paid. That's probably not the best question to ask, or benefits or things like that. Sometimes you don't always know those things, but you want to think about, again, how you're giving to them and benefiting them. It shouldn't all be about you. You can ask about training opportunities, professional development opportunities. You could ask about advancement. That's all okay, but you want to avoid those straight out things like money and benefits. And then again, asking if they haven't already told you those next steps, thanking them for your time. If you don't have the contact information for whoever's interviewing you, getting that. Because the final thing that you're going to want to do is send a thank you note to that employer. What that looks like can vary a little bit. That could be a written card, letter. It can be an email. Depending on who it is, they may not be in their office a whole lot, so sometimes an email is a quicker way to get back to them. So just something, thanking them for their time, for meeting with you, that you enjoyed it. Maybe there was something specific you talked about that will kind of jog their memory that was you. But you're doing that extra step. And I will tell you that a lot of people are not sending thank you notes. So if you can do it, it will be a way to set you apart and take that little bit of extra effort or time. And I think that goes both on campus and off campus. Thank yous go a long way. Other tips, always arrive. We talked about that 15 minutes early. Bring extra copies with you. You might be interviewing with people who don't have a copy. Might want to see that. Bring something to put them in, like a nice portfolio, pen, paper. Always bring something to write with. And turn off your cell phone. And don't just put it on vibrate, because we all know some phones are louder than others, or you're in class and you hear that phone shaking. You don't want that to be you in an interview. So just turn it off. You could turn it back on, right back on afterwards, but you don't want that distraction. And then a couple of last notes that I want to point out. All of this that you're doing here on campus and all of the other things that you're involved in, hopefully you're familiar or becoming more and more familiar with Stellar. Maybe you don't know all the ins and outs of it and you're just getting swiped for things and you don't know. But it's collecting those experiences of transformative learning. And the next step for that is going to be, how do you talk to an employer about those? When you graduate, how are you going to use that? So coming soon, you're going to be able to see your actual Stellar, your student transformative learning record. So just like you can get a transcript, you'll be able to get your Stellar transcript and be able to see those experiences. And you'll also be able to tailor them, put some in, take them out, and use that to help write your resume. Use that in an interview. You could potentially show it to an employer. It's just going to depend on the situation, and that's where we can help you to navigate that. But I wanted to pull it up just to show you that it's coming, so that if you've attended or had different events or internships that were connected to Stellar, so for leadership, this person has 2 here for integration and 4 exposures, and they chose the little event and a reflection paper that they did in a class that they wanted to show as some examples. So you can customize that. So I'm not going to go into tons of detail. It's not all available yet, but it is coming, and so we want to make sure that we are connecting those experiences. And the nice thing is that's another way that's keeping track of it, so we don't have to try to remember everything that we've been doing. Okay, so that's a whole lot of information. We'll make sure to get the presentation up as well on the website. But at this point, I'll wrap up with that and take any questions. Do you want to?